I'm a resident of Parnell and live near the Rose Gardens. I would love to have this memorial in the gardens. Ken says, put the monument at Bluff, closer to the ice, which is...
Well, why don't we put it at the Auckland Islands? That's even closer.
Well, I have heard a suggestion there, but you've got to, as you say, Ruth, you've got to tread very carefully on something like this, once the decision's made.
Yeah.
But have you seen the design at all? Do you like the design? I didn't
dislike. I didn't dislike it. Again, it's not for me to judge really. I think, and I don't know how this has come about, but if it was me in charge of this, I would have had the families review 3 concepts. Majority wins, and it all needs to be family led. And if they want it there, it's Auckland public land. Let's just get on and do it. I did read that the ministry had delayed coming up with a decision. It's nothing unusual.
Well,
for
a
me.
decision is going to be made this afternoon. So listen to Checkpoint, and you will hear where this era of this monument is going, or whether or not it's going ahead or whatever. Lee says all the kids at my college science trip to the US at Easter this year are out of pocket $7,300. The insurance company says that it'll not pay out, even though the pandemic was not declared until after the insurance was bought. The school travel agent says that they can pay the kids back about $600 out of $7,300. This is shocking. Many kids worked hard to find this trip themselves. I don't know what we can do about it.
Yeah,
That's
this
outrageous.
is the thing, what are we teaching people?
Yeah.
This is, stuff winds me up.
Someone might have a response to that. What actually they can do there, but that sounds really unfair, doesn't it? The panel are in Z National. You're with Ruth Money, Chris Orr this afternoon. Now, to Dunedin. Among the community awards held in Dunedin recently, there was an eco-sanctuary educator, a motocross world champion, and there was a local surveyor who restored Dunedin's reputation as the home of Baldwin Street, the steepest street in the world, when that was briefly passed to a street in the north of Wales. With us is Dunedin surveyor Toby Stoff, who is the recipient of the Local Hero Award. Toby, kia ora, and welcome to the panel.
Oh, g'day, Wallace. How are you, mate? No, thanks for having us.
It's a pleasure, and congratulations on the award. How does it feel?
Oh, it was lovely. I was really touched, eh? Totally unexpected, and but no, really, really nice thing for them to do, just to say, yeah, good on you, bro. I appreciate it, eh? So, yeah, no, I really did appreciate it.
So let's go back and revisit, and I think it was the front page of the Daily Times, and a person who lived in Dunedin for many, many years, I could appreciate how shocked Dunedin was when they woke up to the news that, guess what? The world's steepest street was not in Dunedin after all. It was in North Wales. Pick up the story, Toby.
Yeah, well, it was the day after we lost the Cricket World Cup, you see, so I was in Melbourne.
No.
Oh, I know you
And
feel
then
that.
this on top of, just insult on top of injury. So I was, really brassed off, and I thought, well, I was just very, very, very cross. And then my mate Dylan came through with the photo of them doing it, and I said, well, that's wrong for a start. Look where they're doing it, doing it on the inside of that curve. So,
Toby, you're a legend. You are a legend.
I wouldn't say that. I like to have a go. I like to get involved, mate.
This is it. This is a sense of community. You got in there and you sorted it out.
But you went up. But Toby, you as a Dunedin surveyor went up against them single-handedly. Went up against the might that is the world record adjudicator at the Guinness World Records. You look at that. You look at that street in North Wales, and I think that Jim Moore as well, who had a hand in it and actually getting Baldwin Street as the world's steepest street. I can recall him in the office looking at that photo for the first time and goes, there's something wrong there.
Yeah. No, and it was. If we look at all the photos, I've got a whole bunch of them. We, did a bunch of research, and I just went, that's BS, mate. But something's got to be done. And Dunedin is it's got a big village feel. You know what I mean? It's like part of our identity. And I thought, it's not happening, bro. It's like I gave a wee sort of speech when I told a wee story about the wee kid that got his skateboard stolen, and his dad says, well, don't come crying to me, go, kick him in the you know what I mean? And I said, well, we just got to do it. And timing was super critical, because if we had let that thing go off the boil, 6 months later, we probably wouldn't have, been successful. It would have been, people would have had it in their mind by osmosis, fake news, Donald Trump, all that sort of jazz.
This is incredible.
No, we just got to get stuck
Someone
in.
here says, Toby deserves a knighthood. But look, in a nutshell, technically, how did you sway the world record, the Guinness Book of Records?
Well, what we did is we just went and we measured the two streets, but what we did is we just dropped a great big massive data bomb on them. So we went, we could have done it I could have done it in like a week with a little bit of data, but no, we're going to pull out all the stops, mate, and we mapped it. We did what we call heat maps, so we could actually assign colours to gradients. So straight away they could see, Baldwin Street's all red, whereas the Welsh Street is red fading to yellow, then green. Then we got support for our methodology from Otago University, Canterbury University. We even I was in dialogue with guys from MIT, Professor Herbert Einstein from MIT. I thought we're going to pull out all the stops, but when he heard we were doing that thing with Judge Rinder, they pulled out. So but I just said, look, mate, we're going to pull out all the stops, pulled up spreadsheets for Africa. We analysed. My mate Ray sent down a scanner, so we got 140 million points on Baldwin Street. We got 500,000 points, I think, on Fort Penn Lake. But even so that was enough. We just dropped a great big massive data bomb. And when they saw the policy support from, 2 universities plus, consulting engineers, traffic engineers, I think that was a message to them that maybe we've got to take this seriously. So they got their own independent advice. And then they went, you know what, guys, I think you got a point. And they says, you have your record back. So,
hey, round of applause for Toby.
Yeah, Toby, that's
great.
awesome.
Toby, as a Dunedin boy born and bred, it's same as Jim Mora. Thank you it's just been one of the great things of my life was Baldwin Street. My auntie lived just down the road a bit.
Really?
And I ran up it a couple of times in my youth. So thank you, mate, for everything you've done for Dunedin and for New Zealand too. Thank you.
Well, thank you, guys. I'm just glad everyone seemed to enjoy the story and got a bit of a chuckle out of it. I mean, let's be honest, we didn't bloody save any lives or anything like that, but, we're just sticking up for our principles. And like I say, if someone goes and nicks your skateboard, well,
you dropped it,
don't you?
What's the, finally, Toby, as a local hero, what's the moral of the story? And what's the wider message?
Well, actually, probably what Ian Taylor said. He made a really good speech at that awards ceremony. He says, look, life is like a fight. And, you got to be prepared to fight to the death for stuff, and especially if it's like a principle or something. And he says told the story of like married people when they go out fishing. It was like it's not a fable. It's like a story with a moral. He says if you hook a shark, you got to be prepared for a fight because the shark is going to fight to the death. And he says you got to take that mindset, into your working life and just to your life. And if someone wrongs you, then you got to fight. You got to. You got to get shit like that reinstated, eh? Excuse my French. Didn't mean to use bad words on the radio.
Good to have you on, Toby Stoff.
Thank you.
And congratulations. Nice to have you. There you go. Baldwin Street is back. And Chris or Ruth Money, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wallace. Thank you, Ruth. Nice to be here with you.
I'm Wallace Chapman back 3:45. Checkpoint is next. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, are we being pinged too much for groceries? The government launches a year-long investigation into supermarkets. Grocery suppliers want a mandatory code of conduct amid allegations. Some of the big players are using heavy-handed tactics to squeeze them hard. The new tourism minister urges the industry to target wealthy overseas visitors. But how does that help while the borders are closed? Are shipping delays about to sink Christmas? We talked to Ports of Auckland. Deja vu in Northland, another police officer shot at, another manhunt. The Prime Minister considers ways to boost first home buyer deposits. And Māori sport scores targeted funding. But is it enough? Don't forget, you can watch us on Facebook. RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. A long-serving former finance minister is sounding a warning about the impact on house prices of pumping more cheap cash into the economy. The government is coming under pressure to act in the face of an overheated housing market as the Reserve Bank embarks on a multi-billion-dollar lending program. The former Labour Deputy Prime Minister Michael Cullen says the central bank now has a broader remit, so its actions have more wide-reaching economic consequences.
What it's doing are things which are going to have negative impacts almost certainly on some of our crucial problems, like house price increases, and like the fact that doing this also is widening wealth differentials within society, when obviously at least the current government would prefer to see the opposite happening to that.
Michael Cullen says it's time to discuss whether the strict independence of the Reserve Bank from the government of the day is still the best way to operate. The police in Whangarei are temporarily armed after one of their own was shot at this morning. Multiple shots were fired after a vehicle fled from a road policing checkpoint in the suburb of Otangarei in North Whangarei. A sergeant followed, but the driver fired a shot into the air, then fired up to 5 shots at the patrol car. The officer is unharmed, although shaken. Northland District Commander Superintendent Tony Hill says they're looking now for one offender, the driver.
Whilst this matter is still under investigation, our staff are in a temporary carriage state, so our staff will be carrying firearms, but that's to ensure that they're safe while we locate this offender.
Tony Hill says it appears none of the shots hit the police car. Consumer New Zealand has suggested supermarkets be subject to a code of conduct as they are in Australia. The government has ordered the Commerce Commission to conduct a year-long inquiry into whether New Zealanders are paying a fair price at the checkout. Consumer New Zealand's Chief Executive John Duffy says that's a good move.
We get regular complaints about misleading prices, whether it's the shelf price not matching what's being charged at the till, or the Briscoe's effect, where an item remains on special for so long that it's hard to argue it's still on special.
John Duffy says supermarkets wield extraordinary power over suppliers as one of very few options to display their goods. Health officials are urging people who were in certain central Auckland businesses early this month to get a COVID test, regardless of whether they have symptoms. They're still trying to work out how a student working at a shop in the central city got the virus from a member of the Defence Force who was working at a quarantine facility. So far, 5 cases have been linked to, and wide surveillance testing is being carried out. Officials are asking anyone who visited central city businesses including Mcely and the A to Z collection store between November the 5th and 11th to get tested. The fate of a controversial National Erebus Memorial in Auckland is still being decided. The Waitemata Local Board has been meeting this afternoon to decide whether to give landowner consent for the memorial planned for Dovemeyer Robinson Park in Parnell. The project has faced long-standing opposition from nearby residents. Joe Malcolm, whose family have lived in Parnell for many years, is one of them.
Those of us who oppose this are not NIMBYs. We are not a small handful of locals. We come from across this beautiful city. We are diverse politically and socially. We are not awful, unkind, uncaring people, and we are not averse to change.
Parnell resident Joe Malcolm, who is one of the residents opposing the National Erebus Memorial in a local park. The Solomon Islands government has decided to ban Facebook, citing a need for stricter cybercrime legislation and regulation. The Solomons Communications Minister says there is concern, particularly about what children are accessing and being exposed to. He says the decision will not require Parliament's approval, and the government is already talking to telecommunications companies. Christchurch is officially experiencing a mini heatwave, but it will be short-lived. Met Service defines heatwaves as 5 consecutive days of temperatures 5 degrees above average. Its meteorologist Talia Crabtree says the average high for Christchurch in November is 19 degrees, and today marks the 5th day of temperatures well above that.
It's only a very short heat wave, so the temperatures have been very warm since last Friday the 13th, but we do have a cold change on the way for this evening, so it's definitely a very brief heat wave.
Talia Crabtree says tomorrow's forecast high in Christchurch is 18 degrees, along with a few showers and cold southerlies. It's 5 minutes past 5. The new Black Caps batsman Devon Conway is happy to bide his time in the T20 squad for now. Conway from Wellington and Auckland fast bowler Kyle Jamieson are the two newcomers to the squad for this month's series against the West Indies, with Kane Williamson and Trent Boult being rested before the test matches. Devon Conway's record since moving from South Africa 3 years ago has been impressive, with many commentators expecting him to get a test call-up. But Conway says he's not disappointed at missing out on the test squad.
Just getting an opportunity in the T20 squad is pretty special right now. You know, we don't want to push things too soon. I've still got to earn the right to get that test call-up, and hopefully that maybe happens in the future. We'll see how it goes.
The new Black Caps batsman Devon Conway. Rugby administrator Brent Impey has resigned as chair of SANZAAR, citing a conflict of interest after 5 years in the role. Impey says the Super Rugby body needs to make changes and an independent chair would be best placed to do that. Impey says being chair of New Zealand Rugby is a conflict and feels SANZAAR should become a membership-based organisation. He says that would allow the group to act together on things like the global calendar, rules, regulations and mutual commercial interests. Hollywood stars Ryan Reynolds and Rob Mcely have been confirmed as the new owners of the Welsh football club Wrexham, with 99% of the club members backing the takeover. That's the news.
This summer, it's not just a slip, slop, slap and wrap as masks become mandatory.
Cabinet was very mindful of not having the rules changing all of the time. We do want to have some stability and predictability in the rules.
But not everyone is covered.
I think they should have everybody wear a mask in a taxi and Uber.
If you want for safety for the community, it's supposed to be everywhere.
As a second promising vaccine is announced.
We're thrilled, 94% effective. We have the tools to finally beat this virus.
The COVID containment kit. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Fine weather today, showers for a time tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, fine today apart from areas of cloud. Periods of rain tomorrow with possible thunderstorms in Taranaki, Whanganui and Manawatu, easing to isolated showers by tomorrow night. Bulla and Westland rain with heavy fall, spreading north today, becoming fine tomorrow apart from isolated showers. Fiordland showers becoming isolated tomorrow with fine spells increasing. Nelson and Marlborough, cloud increasing tonight, rain at times tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, high cloud tonight, showers developing tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, showers developing about coastal Southland tonight, spreading further north tomorrow, remaining mostly dry about central and north Otago. And Chatham Islands, low cloud increasing this evening, rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5. Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Supermarkets are coming under the microscope with the launch of a sweeping investigation into whether Kiwis are getting ripped off at the checkout. The government's ordered the Commerce Commission to conduct a year-long inquiry into grocery prices, as it did with fuel prices last term. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It's a tone which for many signals alarm, a growing sense of dread as the bill ticks up at checkout.
Prices are going up, yeah, and especially on a pension, it's not easy.
Sometimes the veggies are, oh my God, $4 for a pepper.
Some of the specials don't seem like real specials. God, everything costs so much, so if they can investigate why, that'd be great.
And that's the big question officials are looking to answer. Why? Why are grocery prices quite so high?
Today, the government has taken action to ensure Kiwis are paying a fair price at the checkout for their groceries.
It's David Clark's first act as Commerce Minister, making good on a campaign promise. The Commerce Commission will take a deep dive into the grocery market over the next year, investigating everything from pricing practices through to the true extent of competition.
The emphasis will be on making sure that Kiwis get a fair suck of the sav.
We do have a heavy concentration amongst a couple of big players, and that in our mind is good cause for us to look at whether or not New Zealand is being treated fairly.
New Zealand is dominated by two supermarket chains, Australian-owned Countdown and Foodstuffs, which owns New World and Pack and Save. Both declined interviews, but issued statements saying the market was intensely competitive and they were focused on putting shoppers first. They say they now welcome the chance to prove it. For years, critics have pointed to the duopoly as a reason for high prices. But Greg Harford from Retail NZ says that's not necessarily the case.
New Zealand's obviously very different to other markets. We're a much smaller market. We don't have the same scale that you have in other markets. GST, 15% is levied on all food in New Zealand, whereas in a lot of other markets that's tax exempt. So there's a range of things that go into prices.
Indeed, the opposition says the government bears some of the blame. National's Todd Mcely says the inquiry should take into account Labour's policies, such as the minimum wage hike.
Today, the government can do something to help consumers and every single business in New Zealand by finding ways to reduce costs on them, not piling them on.
The review will go wider than just pricing. Consumer NZ hopes it will capture misleading promotions. And the Food and Grocery Council's hoping for a code of conduct on supermarkets, like in Australia or the United Kingdom. Any decision on that won't come till the end of the inquiry. The report's due back in November next year. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
It's alleged some grocery suppliers are being bullied and face the threat of having their products deleted from supermarket shelves if they speak out about the tactics used by some big players, according to a supplier industry group. The Food and Grocery Council represents suppliers and it welcomes the government-ordered study, but also wants a mandatory industry code of conduct to curb what it calls the egregious behaviour of rogues. The council's CEO, Catherine Rich, says some suppliers are being billed for in-store thefts and are unfairly forced to bid for shelf space in auctions.
In order to get your product on the shelf today, you have to offer supermarkets a gross margin of anywhere between 30 and 45% just to get on the shelf. And then there will be additional costs to promote, shelf costs, merchandising costs, there'll be additional claims, rebates, any opportunity to get more income out of you, the list is endless.
So are suppliers being held to ransom here?
I believe that most have little or no negotiation power. So it's not they're held to ransom, it's that they're forced to be in a position of being a price taker. It's like, take this on board or don't supply us or have your product deleted. And that's one thing that is also ruled out by the code. You can't just use deletion as a threat. You have to have commercial grounds rather than saying, I don't like that you're complaining to me, I'm going to delete your product. Or if you don't pay this, I'm going to delete your product. Deletion is usually the default tactic.
So by deletion, you mean get tossed off the shelf in the supermarket, you're gone?
And that is very, very serious because in a system, in a market structure where there are two main supermarket teams, if you get kicked off the shelf, you can lose anywhere between 45% and 55% of your sales. And for some New Zealand companies, that is the difference between surviving or shutting down their factories. And that is why I think we've seen so much manufacturing move offshore and we're more reliant on imports.
So how often is robust negotiation crossing the line into bullying on the part of the supermarket?
I would say that most maintain a healthy culture, but at the store level, we do have some buyers and some store owners who clearly never got the memo and just make demands which are well beyond robust negotiation. But of course, no one can complain for fear of being deleted. And that's why if you ever try and get a grocery supplier to come on your show to discuss things, you won't find anybody who's prepared to speak because the fear of retribution is very, very genuine.
So, well, how then are we going to find out what goes on behind the scenes if that fear is so strong? There's an investigation, a review. So how are we going to get them to speak up, honestly?
Well, the Commerce Commission is very aware that it is a market environment where most suppliers are not or do not feel at liberty to speak or are fearful of retribution. So that is why in the last time the Commerce Commission did an investigation of sorts, they provided absolute confidentiality. But certainly the Food and Grocery Council will be providing anonymised scenarios which are based on the sorts of behaviour that we have seen. But it's certainly something the Commerce Commission is aware of this. In this market environment, it is hard to speak out because you could lose your space on the shelf.
So are customers getting ripped off, and how do we exercise choice when there's two main suppliers?
Well, I'm very confident that the wholesale prices from New Zealand food and grocery manufacturers are fair and reasonable because the fat's been trimmed from companies years ago through these negotiations. But margins do remain high in New Zealand. In fact, some industry commentators will say that New Zealand and Australia have the most profitable supermarkets in the developed world, and that's because they have very, very high margins, the difference between revenue and the cost of goods. And some will say there's competition. Actually, no, there's not, if you think about where you get your laundry powder and other grocery items. So when you have that privileged position of a market duopoly or duopsony, you have to have additional accountabilities and responsibilities. And that's what a study will look at, and that's what we think a code will deliver.
So, Catherine, are you saying that it is the supermarkets that are creaming it while the suppliers keep getting squeezed and the consumers are having to dig deep into their pockets, but it's not your people that are getting the money?
I'm saying that we have many food and grocery manufacturers who have either gone out of business or had to shut down or move their product offshore for development because you just can't make a normal profit.
So who is making the profit then, Catherine? Spell it out for us. Who's getting the goodies?
As I've said, supermarkets in New Zealand are the most profitable in the world. They have the most highly concentrated market in the world. But that said, I can't say it's absolutely just the supermarkets because there are some factors in the New Zealand market that are important. We're one of the few countries in the world that puts GST on food and groceries, unlike most countries. We are at the bottom of the world and it's expensive to freight down here. We have a market size, the geography size of Japan, and a very small market the size of Sydney. So it is complex, but it's all these things that a market study will look at.
You would like a code of conduct, like Australia, right? But the code in Australia is voluntary. So, I mean, is that really going to solve our problems?
We would like it to be mandated and overseen by the Commerce Commission. It won't solve all the problems. Supplying the grocery market is never for the faint-hearted, for all those out there dreaming the big dream and wanting to set up their own food companies, but it will make a difference. Overnight, it did rule out some of the more egregious behaviour that was seen in both Australia and the UK. Things like forcing suppliers to pay for theft in store, which is completely a retail cost, forcing making arbitrary deductions from payments just because you can. You know, it will bring a level of professionalism back to those stores who are the problem, the minority of stores.
Catherine, so I'm understanding this correctly. Are you saying if someone shoplifts from a supermarket and the product goes walkabout, that the supplier of that product is being asked to pay for what's been stolen?
Yes, in some circumstances. And I'll give you one example. One store did check their inventory, did a stock take. They looked at what they had on shelf minus their sales and obviously what they'd lost, and they billed the supplier to pay the difference. Now, I would say retail theft and a whole bunch of other costs that are genuine retail costs should sit with the retailer. It is unfair to keep shifting the costs back to suppliers to pay as some kind of arbitrary new cost.
So you're talking about people being too scared to speak out because they could be bullied. Their product could be, as you put it, deleted, and they're being charged for thefts that they haven't, they're not responsible for in any way, shape or form. You're talking, sounding like the grocery mafia here, isn't it, Catherine?
It's certainly a business culture that has to change. And some store owners do a very good job. But there are some out there who clearly have not got the memo and are getting away with it. And every time we try and raise it, certainly with the independent stores, the owner-operators, people will say, it's their business, they can do what they like. But I always think sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's why I've been talking openly about the type of behaviour, because certainly when it comes to the treatment of merchandisers, they're mostly women who go into those stores at ungodly hours to stack shelves. They deserve to be treated better and to work within a better grocery culture. And that's what we're hoping for as a result of this market study, and with hopefully it leading to a grocery code of conduct, because it will make a difference. Won't solve everything, but it will make a difference.
So while you say that generally, well, people play by the rules, but some aren't, how do you describe the ones who aren't playing by the rules?
I call them rogues. In some cases, I think that they are store owners who actually wear this kind of behave as if this kind of culture should be seen as a badge of honour. And part of it wasn't even acceptable last century, and it's certainly not acceptable in 2020. And those are the stores that we are going to lobby hard to get to change their practices.
Are you describing bullies?
Yes, I am. And in many cases, there's no other word for it. There are some stores in the Auckland area where our members will not send a rep and not send a merchandiser because they think the environment is harmful to their mental health. Now, what does that tell you?
And that was Catherine Rich from the Food and Grocery Council. Importers are demanding answers as to why their goods are being held up at ports of Auckland. Some New Zealand retailers fear their shelves will be half empty as they approach the festive season. Last week, Main Freight Managing Director Don Braid told Checkpoint Ports of Auckland were struggling to get slots available on its wharf for arriving vessels. In a moment, we'll talk to Ports of Auckland about what's causing those delays, but first, here's our reporter Nick Trubridge.
Automation was supposed to be a magic bullet for Ports of Auckland. Its website hails automated straddle carriers as a way of boosting capacity and making its operations more sustainable. But the project is also being blamed for contributing to delays that have retailers fearing their shelves will be bare at the busiest time of year.
Yes, we've had COVID peaks and troughs of demand. We've had a restriction of capacity from the shipping lines deliberately in an effort to raise up profit and freight rates, and they've been very successful at that. But focusing on the Ports of Auckland, I think the issue that we think is the problem is around the labour and the automation that has been trying to be implemented at the port.
That's Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Federation President Chris Edwards. He believes automation's to blame for a shipping logjam at Auckland's port.
Originally there would have been, say, 50-odd crane drivers down at the port unloading ships, taking containers off, loading the export containers on, and off they go. We understand there are currently 10, and an automated system is not working.
Edwards believes they should revert back to a manual system to clear the backlog before going back to automation. He reckons the port is almost at crisis point.
It's getting pretty serious when you've got vessels not even coming to this country anymore, leaving their containers in Australia and waiting for the situation to alleviate. With an export season not far away, right now the exporters, I don't think, are aware of the issues, but they soon will be if these vessels are still affected by the congestion. And the Ports of Auckland is the first port in the chain of port calls that vessels come in. Its functioning or otherwise has a massive effect on the rest of the country.
For now, huge discrepancies remain between ships arriving in Auckland and when vessels are actually expected to berth.
Some of those dates are 12 to 14 days after the arrival of the ship. Now, put also in context that often there's been such delays from origin, say China, Europe or the United States, that an importer could have been waiting 4 or 6 weeks before the vessel even arrives here, let alone a further 2 weeks to then get their hands on the product. Now, the port will say, okay, well, vessels are diverting past Auckland and going to Tauranga, and that is true. But Tauranga, because of the volume that's going through that port, is taking on average between 8 to 12 days for the rail system to clear an import container to bring it up to Auckland. So it's not really a good solution.
Edwards is due to sit down with Ports of Auckland tomorrow to chart the way ahead. Meanwhile, Retail NZ Chief Executive Greg Harford said stock shortages are a very serious concern for retailers in the lead up to Christmas.
Obviously, a retailer needs to have stock in store or in the warehouse in order to be able to sell that to customers. So if those products aren't available, then that means less revenue coming through the door for those retailers. And what would normally be the busiest and most profitable time of the year may well be one that turns up short and doesn't necessarily deliver good results for the retailer.
And retailers may not be the only ones paying. You too could miss out on those promised pre-Christmas sales.
What we might see, in fact, is a lessening of the discounts that we might otherwise see during Black Friday and in the run-up to Boxing Day. Typically, those are big times of year for discounting, but if there's not as much stock available and there's ongoing consumer demand for products, it might mean that discounting is not possible.
Auckland's Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Michael Barnett says he's heard from a number of businesses worried about their future if shipping delays continue. He says one North Shore business wrote to him recently saying if things don't improve soon, they'll be forced to shut. Another victim of the shipping snarl-up. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And joining us now is Ports of Auckland's General Manager of Communications, Matt Ball. Kia ora, Matt. How can Ports of Auckland do better?
G'day, Lisa. Yeah, things are a bit difficult at the moment, but it was interesting listening to the comments from Chris there. I really do need to correct that. He's putting the blame on automation, which is not correct, and he's saying that I think we had 10 crane drivers as opposed to we used to have 50 and we switched on automation, and those numbers are just completely wrong. So the bits that are problematic, there are some issues from overseas, but the thing that we have got wrong is that we misunderestimated the impact of COVID on our business and on the labour supply. So we are now in a position where we don't have enough staff. It's not like Chris says, but we don't have enough staff.
How short are you, Matt, and of what jobs?
We're short of some crane drivers, some straddle operators, and a lot of lashers, and a few other roles. We probably need around 50 people. Long term, we're like many industries, like truck driving and others, where we have always had a short supply of staff. So we've always been about 30 short in the last sort of 2 to 3, 4 years, but it's got worse as a result of COVID.
But you accept there's some poor planning on your part then in terms of forecasting?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we didn't anticipate some of the impacts of COVID. So, for example, the automation project, we were actually trying to get that done and sorted in the quiet part of the year before July. We were going to go live with the first half of that automation in March. Then we had the lockdown, and that just pushed everything back. And now we've gone half automated, but we've hit the busy part of the year. And so as a result, we've had to work harder. We're operating 2 terminals. We don't have full automation, which would have actually relieved some of that labour pressure. And all of those
well,
things.
So they're right when they say automation is not working, because in the sense, just hear me out here, Matt, in the sense that you have acknowledged you're not all the way through the automation project, which would have lifted productivity, sped things up. So you're a halfway house. You're operating 2 different systems and not, at your peak performance.
Yeah. But it's not true to say that automation isn't working. I mean, as an example, we're very slow getting the ships in, but we're not slow in operating the trucks at the other end of the terminal, getting the containers on the trucks. And the automated side, the manual side, both load the trucks at the same speed. So, we have that with fewer people.
Why can't you get the ships in faster?
That's our labour resources on the whole rest of the terminal. So crane drivers, straddle drivers and lashers.
That's pretty poor, isn't it, Matt, coming into what is the busiest part of the year?
No, it's not good. That's right. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to hire people as fast as we can. That, admittedly, is still difficult. We thought maybe things will be better at the moment because, a lot of people have lost jobs, but we've got 7 people starting work on Monday, but that's out of over 30 people that we interviewed. Only 7 have got through the process. We are finding it difficult to hire people.
So how are you going to put this right in the short period of time that you've got? Because you will appreciate this. There are people who are sitting there and their businesses will sink or survive based on how quickly you can get the ship and their container unloaded and to them. So what's your message to them?
We are working as hard as we can to try and get more staff on. We're working with the Ministry of Transport and Immigration to try and get visa changes for people who have the skills that we need, who are in New Zealand. So we're working with officials on that. That's a small number of people, but it will help. And we are just continuing to advertise. I mean, it's a pretty good job. I know you have to work nights and weekends, but, we pay minimum wage, not minimum wage, we pay the living wage at worst for the lower skilled jobs. 5 weeks leave, 15 days sick pay, there's fatigue leave if you get tired. So, it's a good job.
Matt, how did you get your forecasting so wrong?
I think COVID, to a certain extent, did catch us out. I can really only put it down to that we kind of...
Well, is that true when you say that you've been 30 people down before COVID? So it's not all COVID, is it?
No, it's not all COVID, but it did catch us unawares. It pushed out the automation project, like I say. That was coming along to help us with those labour numbers, and we haven't been able to implement it. We were hoping we could have got the work done, and we tried to get the work done, but the early import peak also caught us out. So, there's been significant changes in the import patterns as well, and that did catch us out.
We spoke to Don Braid last week from Mainfreight, big company, lot of business, and I want to read you a quote from him. Of Ports of Auckland, he says this: "They are underperforming. Their lower productivity for this time of year, this is the peak time, is just not good enough. I'm sure they will have all the excuses in the world, but the reality is the country requires that port to perform as best as it can." What is your response to that?
Well, unfortunately, at the moment, we are performing as best as we can.
But your best is not good enough right now, is it?
No, it's not. We need more people. We need to progress our automation, and we need to get back to operating at that level that we have been, which is, among the best ports and best productivity in Australasia.
What's the backlog right now? How long does it take?
It depends what you're talking about. So ships, 10 to 12 days are waiting to get into port, the container ships. That's not true for car ships and bulk and those other things. They are coming through okay. In terms of getting containers off the port, actually that's very smooth, and we are having world-beating times in getting containers off the port. So less than 2 days dwell time, which is really up there.
Given what you are saying there, given that you are having labour capacity issues and that this is not a short-term fix, what does that mean for Christmas demand? What does it mean for businesses? Sounds like you can't put this right before Christmas.
It will be tough. We will try and get
tough
the
or
staff
impossible?
that we need. I honestly don't know, Lisa. It really depends on who we can get through the door, who we can interview, and how quickly we can get people on board and train them.
Can you understand or appreciate why some of your customers are really unhappy with you right now?
Absolutely.
So, are you offering them an apology?
Oh, absolutely. And we communicate to our customers very regularly. I think that was one of the things Don Braid said we did do quite well. But we really are trying to put things right. It will only come right when we get the right number of people, when we get automation finished and get things working properly. Yes, it will take a number of weeks. It's a difficult thing that we are doing, but we are working as hard as we can to get it done.
What's the Mayor said to you about this? Has he asked for a please explain?
We've kept the Mayor updated on this, so we've kept him across the issues.
Has he expressed, unhappiness with the situation?
I don't know at that point.
So have you had conversations with him?
Not me personally, no.
Because that's the other question that your customers are asking. Where's your CEO? Where's the chair? Why aren't they fronting up and answering questions on this?
They're happy to answer questions, but, it's my job to talk to the media and answer questions, and we have fronted for every media outlet that's asked us about this.
So the buck stops with you. It's on you, is it?
It is. I am part of the exec team, so I'm part of the group where the buck stops.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the General Manager of Communications for the Ports of Auckland, Matt Ball. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the Tourism Minister says forget about freedom campers and target visitors with fat wallets. Jacinda Ardern looks at options to help first home buyers bulk up their deposits. And the South African-born batsman who's landed in the Black Caps. We would love your feedback. Get in touch about what you make of grocery prices. Are we getting a fair deal or not at the checkout? And also, if you're a business waiting on freight, how is it going for you out there? We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101 one, or if you're looking for something that you can't get as well, which is, I suppose, the end game in the freighting business, get in touch as well. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
The Prime Minister says the government won't be intervening in the Reserve Bank's approach to stimulating the economy, as the two should stay at arm's length. The National Party and former Labour Finance Minister Michael Cullen are warning the central bank's multi-billion-dollar lending program will just push house prices higher. But Jacinda Ardern says there has been long-term consensus over the separation between politicians and the Reserve Bank, and she won't be intervening. Retail NZ is recommending the government take GST off groceries or fruit and vegetables if it wants to drop supermarket prices. The government has directed the Commerce Commission to conduct an inquiry into grocery prices, as it did into fuel prices last term. For years, critics have blamed high prices on a lack of competition, but Retail NZ says New Zealand is a small market, so there isn't the same scale as in other countries, and GST adds 15% to all foods. However, food suppliers are welcoming the inquiry and also want a mandatory industry code of conduct. Catherine Rich from the Food and Grocery Council told Checkpoint suppliers face the threat of having their products deleted from supermarket shelves if they speak out about the supermarket's tactics. A former gang member in Whangarei says gangs are far more vicious now than they were in the past. Another police officer was shot at in Northland this morning following a spate of similar shootings. Martin Kaipo is now chief executive of the community organisation Otangarei Trust. He says the area is troubled by drugs and gangs, and they're more aggressive than they were 20 years ago. Hurricane Iota has made landfall along the coast of northeastern Nicaragua as a Category 4 storm. Iota is packing maximum sustained winds of 250 kilometres an hour. Sport New Zealand has today invested $7 million into targeted initiatives to support Māori in sport. The funding is from a wider $265 million recovery package for the sports sector after COVID-19. The Māori Golf Association says the money won't go very far when it is spread over 4 years, but it's a good start. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, big box retailers, what are they to start with? Outperforming their friends on the high street.
Yes, so big box retailers, we can think of the likes of big standalone stores, so big supermarkets, things like the Warehouse, Bunnings, think of big boxes quite literally. So we did get the half-year result from the property investor Investor today, and they are specialists in supermarket property and in big box property, and they have had a whopping half-year result. It's up 700% on last year, so it's posted an after-tax profit of $91 million compared with under just $10 million a year ago, and that huge increase is largely been driven by the value of its properties increasing by about $87 million. And I asked the CEO why, and he said it's largely because of the resilience of its tenants. It's or the resilience of their businesses. So that's mainly supermarkets, who will always be classified as an essential business in this post-COVID environment. And also they've been benefiting from this low interest rate environment and the fact that, more and more people are pulling their money out of banks in search of better returns because of low interest rates. And it turns out they're pouring that money into commercial property. And the reason why this is interesting, I find, is because, we've heard plenty of stories about how the retail sector has been hammered by COVID-19, in particular on the high streets of cities and towns throughout this country. But it's clear that this sector has been able to shrug off the very worst effects of COVID-19. Its tenants have been doing very well, and it's not just supermarkets, and that's by Investor's accounts. It's had to support a number of its tenants throughout this year, but that's through rent deferrals and abatements. But it says for most of its tenants, they've now come off those and they're now trading on their own and they're going well. And look, this company, it says it's only going to lose about $1 million in rent income for the full year. And that is literally or figuratively a drop in the bucket for a company of this size. And so I think this really just speaks to the way that consumer habits have changed throughout this pandemic, or how they've been accelerated by COVID-19. Because more and more people, they are buying online, but there are certain things that New Zealanders will continue to go into the store to buy. Their groceries, and it turns out their hardware as well.
Okay. I'm really interested in this next story, given the conversation that we've just had with Ports of Auckland.
Yes, I thought you might be.
Yeah, Fletcher Building, you say, is, well, the latest victim of constrained shipping supply routes. What's going on with that?
Yeah, the construction company says shipping delays are putting pressure on supplying some of its steel products. So we heard some reports about this, and we put some questions to the company after we heard that some of its products were out of stock. And remember, Fletcher Building doesn't just build stuff, it also has building supplies, building products, things like that. And in reply, Fletcher says, yes, delays are being caused by reduced and variable shipping schedules. And in addition, it says it was having to import steel products as it stopped making this in this country, and that's only adding to the time or the delays to meet those, to supply these orders. The company did brush aside the delays, however, saying that the impact on business has been minimal and it's monitoring the situation. But look, this just appears to be a story that will not go away. Yesterday, we got the latest read from the performance sector. That's from the BNZ Bank. Didn't have time to talk about it on the show last night, but surprisingly, in that result, what came as a real shock to me was that the demand for new orders in the services sector is through the roof. It's outstripping the supply in terms of sales and actual stock deliveries, which this index manages. It shows that they are in contraction territory. When I spoke to the bank's economist about this, he says that many firms are dealing with constraints both in staff, that is its own story completely, but also getting those necessary supplies. And one of the consequences of this could be, well, higher prices. So look, it's unfortunately, until this congestion subsides, we're only going to hear more and more stories about this from different parts of the economy who've been affected by not being able to get stuff into the country on time when they need it.
You can't sell what you don't have, and if you've got a limited supply, it's going to cost you more, as you point out. What's been going on the markets today,
Well,
Nicholas?
the NZX, it closed up 20 points to 12,765. Our dollar, this was the last time I checked up at the screen upstairs, it had just eclipsed 69 US cents. And that says the US dollar has seen some losses today as the return of some restrictions in some US states, and there's also been some worries about a smooth transition for the president-elect. Well, and so on the other currencies that we monitor, we're at 94.3 Australian and we're buying 52.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. The new tourism minister has told the industry to attract wealthy, high-value tourists as soon as the borders reopen. Stuart Nash told the Tourism Industry Summit he wants to drive a transition away from low-spending, high-cost tourists. Tourism reporter Tess Brunton is at the summit and filed this report.
For tourism leaders, today's summit was the first opportunity to catch up in person after a disaster of a year. It was where new Tourism Minister Stuart Nash chose to unveil his vision for the industry.
The question of who pays. New Zealand should not be subsidising international visitors to the extent we have done in the past. Some of the costs, such as the impact on infrastructure and the environment, are currently shouldered by taxpayers and ratepayers, when I don't believe they need to be to the extent that they have been.
The minister outlined a vision where the industry moves away from the likes of freedom campers. He says when the borders reopen, it's the wealthier tourists who need to be targeted. But in terms of when that can happen, the minister didn't have the magic date the industry's hanging out for.
It's not just the industry that's looking at a $10 billion hole, it's actually the whole economy that's looking at a $10 billion hole. There's a level of resilience in the New Zealand economy that I don't think Treasury forecast, or I don't think we all believed existed pre-COVID. It is still there. There are a number of businesses that have fallen over, we know that, but it is just a matter of making sure that we do as much as we possibly can in terms of buying local, supporting local businesses.
Tourism Futures Task Force co-chair Steve Chadwick started her speech with congratulations for the industry and its new minister.
What an energy bunny you've got as a minister, and I think that's going to be wonderful for us all. And I'm pleased that this is his first speech today, and I think he put a bit of a pow in the ground for us all.
Gillian Miller is the Operations Senior Vice President for Accor Hotels for New Zealand, Fiji and French Polynesia. She's pleased that Mr Nash seems keen to engage with the industry and listen.
If you said a year ago we would all be sitting in the situation today of a pandemic with borders closed and the global nature of this situation, none of us would have even envisaged it. Look, we're all coping. I hate the word pivot, but we're all seeing some green shoots here and there. Some regions are seeing better recovery than others. What we need to do, though, is work to build back our industry and work out what does the new industry look like.
That meant one voice to government and working together.
I really want to ensure that we do have business representation. I think the value of the tourism industry really has been underestimated of all the benefits it brings to communities, and hopefully we can get alignment in that storytelling down the track.
Auckland University of Technology senior lecturer Dr. Karianne Wikatera researches Māori tourism and was keen to hear Stuart Nash's vision for the industry.
Very generic and yet inspiring, and a lot of food for thought.
Hamner Springs Thermal Pools and Spa marketing manager Shane Adcock is interested in more discussions about who picks up the tab on infrastructure used by overseas visitors.
I come from Hamner Springs, a very small community that has a very small ratepayer base but has a large number of visitors, and so there's real stresses on infrastructure and those sorts of things. And is that something that local government should have to bear, or ratepayers, or central government? I think there's some really good discussion. So I'm not saying that we potentially all agree, but I think the industry and the wider New Zealand community, it's certainly a discussion that needs to be had.
Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says the Minister's vision for the sector is a promising start.
The one note of caution was the Minister did mention the pressures that are on some communities which were there pre-COVID in managing the impact of tourism. But we must be careful not to demonise international visitors, especially because we want to welcome them back to our shores when the time comes.
While the tourism industry is optimistic about Stuart Nash at the helm, they want action, not just words. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, Tane.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A few of you getting in touch about our earlier interview with the Ports of Auckland. A lot of retailers and freighters concerned about the gnarl up there at the port, not getting their goods fast enough, especially with the festive season approaching. This person says Ports of Auckland's labour shortage is a management stuff-up, pure and simple. It's not due to automation, which is working well, that listener says. And they were saying there are about 50 people down, I think it was, from memory. Someone else has said, I had a water pipe split on my Nissan Ute. Took 3 months for a $127 part to arrive from Japan. Had to spend $19,000 to buy a new Ute so I could keep my business going. Ooh, that's nasty. And another person says, as an imported distributor of summer lines, I am finding the port service crippling and deplorable and costing me tens of thousands of dollars in lost income. Keep your feedback coming on this one. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're really curious to know what products are hard to get at the moment. Let us know if you're in building supplies, if there is anything in particular that's tough to get your hands on, and also home appliances, various ones we're finding, hearing are difficult to get, along with car parts, as mentioned by that listener. So let us know if you are seeking something urgently. We'd like to get a bigger picture on this one. A man is still on the run in Northland after firing at police during a routine stop in the early hours of the morning. Police say they're reasonably confident they know who they're looking for and are supporting the officer who was shot at. Reporter Chen Liu and camera operator Dan Cook are in Whangarei and filed this report.
Multiple shots were fired at a patrol car just after 2 o'clock this morning, and a vehicle fled from a police checkpoint on Te Hononga Street in Whangarei. The vehicle was found up a driveway nearby, but police say the person who fired the shots had taken off. A man who lives close by says he heard the shots.
We hear them all the time, mate. They're normal. Sound like a gun going off. Bang, bang, bang.
Another woman living in the neighbourhood says the incident is terrible and she doesn't feel safe.
The young ones are hurling up and down the roads, doing wheelies. No, it's just getting worse here.
She wants the authorities to take more actions.
More police around would be better.
Northland District Commander Superintendent Tony Hill says officers are focused on apprehending the offender. He says officers will be carrying firearms for the next few days.
We take these matters very seriously, just as if there was a member of the community shot at, and the outcry from the community has been really positive this morning. They're as equally disgusted as we are. We're doing our very best to make sure that our staff are equipped and enabled to deal with these things, and we take them very seriously.
Former gang member Martin Kaipo is now chief executive and co-founder of community organisation Whangarei Trust. He says the area is troubled by drugs and guns.
We're low socio-economic communities.
There's a high dependency on unemployment benefits. There's a high level of, young Māori and searching for leadership.
Mr. Kaipo says he doesn't know anything about this specific incident, but it fits in with the normal gun behaviour. He says things have become more vicious than when he was in a gun 2 decades ago.
They fluctuate. When it does happen, it's usually confrontation over zoning, or like your areas, like your communities and stuff like that. They're very protective, and they'll protect them at any cost, whether the cost is done through open street warfare or drive-bys.
Mr. Kaipo says the incident is worrying.
The sad thing is that crime has now escalated, that is turned against the police. That's the sad part. If they are willing to turn to the police, they're willing to turn on anyone.
He says everyone is to work together to prevent things like this from happening. Families talking to their young people, better law and enforcement, and communities working together.
We don't care what happens in the next street or neighbour over. We've become so entrenched in ourselves and how the old story was, it takes a village to raise that child.
An officer was also shot at near Kerikeri last month, and the police still haven't arrested the person responsible. Whangarei Mayor Cheryl Mai and Far North counterpart John Carter have both called for stricter gun controls. I Whangarei mo te hotaka o te ahiahi nei ko te leo tēnei.
For the second time this month, there's encouraging news about a COVID vaccine. Pharmaceutical giant Moderna says its main vaccine candidate is close to 95% effective in trials, and if approved by authorities, could be in mass production by the end of the year. The ABC's Greg Jennett reports.
It's a really important milestone in the fight against the pandemic.
Moderna's president, Stephen Hogue's achieved a rare feat these days. He's the cautious bearer of good news.
It's really just a milestone, though. We have a lot of work ahead of us. Knowing the vaccine is going to be effective is great news, but we still need to complete the regulatory process.
After Pfizer, Moderna's the second company to report almost 95% effectiveness of its vaccine in trials. That means it works in blocking the virus, but it doesn't mean it's proven itself safe. Even so, applications for approval are pending. And if they come through,
we hope to have about 20 million doses of the vaccine by the end of this year.
So now we have two vaccines that are really quite effective.
Anthony Fauci's the most recognised authority on this disease. He has little doubt the vaccines will clear regulatory approval.
We project that by the end of December, that there will be doses of vaccines available for individuals in the higher risk category from both companies.
The goal is to reach every American, so logistics and distribution would at that point become as important as the lab work has been up to now. The Moderna product's useful because it'll survive in a standard fridge for a month, longer if it's put in the freezer compartment. The stock exchange likes the news. And for governments and public health officials, the prospect of mass vaccination can't come soon enough.
With a second wave bearing down on us, there's an opportunity to fight. There's an opportunity to beat this back.
New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's in a race against time. The city's not by any means among the worst performer for new cases. That mantle sits in parts of Texas and the upper Midwest. But the New York mayor's watching as the new infection rate edges towards 3%.
We see some areas where there's real concern.
3% is the automatic trigger he set months ago for shutting down some or all of the classrooms in America's biggest school education system, with more than 1 million students in it.
The ABC's Greg Jennett there. South Australia is under fresh COVID restrictions today as officials scramble to contain a new community cluster. The outbreak in the northern suburbs of Adelaide has grown to 23 confirmed and suspected cases in just 3 days. Premier Stephen Marshall swiftly moved to temporarily close gyms, play cafes and recreation centres and reintroduced caps on indoor venues. It means some businesses had just hours to shut their venues. The ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald reports.
you going, gals? You all good?
These girls are practicing gymnastics, running towards a vault and springing forward onto a pile of mats. Coach Tammy Page is watching over what'll be the last class at Tea Tree Gully Gym Sports for at least a couple of weeks.
Who wants to show me what they're doing? Off you go.
The not-for-profit gymnastics centre in Banksia Park in Adelaide's northeastern suburbs shut its doors last night as part of a temporary closure of all gyms, recreation centres and play cafes in the state. South Australia's Premier Stephen Marshall announced new restrictions after a cluster of coronavirus cases in Adelaide's northern suburbs grew from 4 to 17. Tammy Page is also the chair of the organisation's board.
I don't think you want to know what went through my head. Or what came out of my mouth.
Maybe not the exact words for radio purposes.
No. It's been a very long, hard day. When I did hear it, I was like, oh, now there's more. So we've immediately had to start, notifying all the members. We have approximately 1,400 members that go through every week. Look at what birthday parties we've got for the next 2 weeks, cancel those, and then we've got to work out how to actually refund 2 weeks of term fees.
On the other side of the city, David Craggs runs a gym in the seaside suburb of Christie's Beach and says the temporary measures weren't entirely a surprise.
The one thing SA government have done is acted pretty aggressively and quickly in these situations, which I think is the right thing to do.
Although he appreciates the public health response, it creates uncertainty for his business.
We're in-person, face-to-face service. In lockdown 1, we did manage, my wife and I, Emma, managed to sort of convert the business to a Zoom model. We're confident we can do that again if need be. We'll try to get that all sorted out in the next day or so.
Premier Stephen Marshall says the restrictions are likely to only be in place for a couple of weeks.
And that is the ABC's Bridget Fitzgerald. Joe Biden has warned people may die if his incoming presidential administration continues to be impeded by Donald Trump. The president continues to insist he won the election and says fraudulent votes took place. However, Mr. Trump has yet to provide any evidence to back up his claims. Now, one of his top aides has admitted a transition to Joe Biden is coming. Our correspondent Simon Marks reports.
More than a week after we all knew Joe Biden had won the election, more than a week after world leaders started deluging the president-elect with their congratulations, a member of President Donald Trump's inner circle finally appears to have bowed to the inevitable. Robert O'Brien, the president's national security advisor, was appearing at a virtual global security forum this morning, and 44 minutes into an interview with an allegedly professional Washington journalist, he was finally asked the question, lovely hearing about Donald Trump's foreign policy, but didn't Joe Biden win the election?
Look, if the Biden-Harris ticket is determined to be the winner, and it's, obviously things look that way now, we'll have a very professional transition from the National Security Council. There's no question about it. If we're in a situation where we're not going to a Trump second term, which I think people here where I'm sitting in the White House would like to see, if it's another outcome, it'll be a professional transition. There's no question about it.
That question was asked as an "and finally" by the interviewer. Oh, by the way, just before you go, didn't Biden win? It isn't only in government circles that 4 years of this nonsense is going to take some time to overcome. President Trump has been in complete Twitter denial again all morning, insisting falsely that he won the election even though he didn't, accusing the media of being in cahoots with Joe Biden's theft of the presidency even though it's not. You know the drill by now. Of COVID-19's record-breaking onward march here, 1 million new cases in just 6 days, not a peep. Instead, 2 hours ago, this from the president. European countries, he wrote on Twitter, are sadly getting clobbered by the China virus. Must be awful to be European countries. His Health Secretary Alex Azar on ABC this morning welcomed the news of Moderna's successful vaccine trials, as though he and the president had themselves just emerged in white coats from the research lab.
We've got a second 90% plus effective vaccine for the American people. This is really a historic day. And we hope that because of Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines, which we've already been producing, to have enough by the end of December to vaccinate 20 million of our most vulnerable citizens.
Credit where it's due, though. The Trump administration did invest $955 million in the Moderna research, which, unlike Pfizer's Pfizer's vaccine unveiled last week is part of the president's Operation Warp Speed. That's one of the reasons why, again on Twitter this morning, the president urged historians to give him the vaccine win. What he's still not willing to give Joe Biden is any kind of assistance preparing to move into government. Still no official transition is underway, the president insisting that at some point this week, who knows when, he's going to drop a boatload of evidence into the public domain proving election fraud took place. Spoiler, it didn't, and he won't.
And that was Simon Marks reporting. A lot of feedback on the freight issue. This person says, this week we were advised our freight was due to land in Auckland today, but it was diverted to Melbourne because of delays at ports of Auckland. This also happened recently with freight out of the UK. The scheduled ship cancelled the uplift at London, so now we won't get that until the 22nd of December. And someone else has got in touch to say of the ports of Auckland and the problems with staffing and delays, they won't fix it by Christmas 2021. Typical inefficient council-owned business.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with tēnei. Grocery suppliers are welcoming a government inquiry into supermarket pricing, hoping it will lead to a change in culture in the industry. The Food and Grocery Council says suppliers face the threat of having their products deleted from supermarket shelves if they speak out about how they're treated. Its Chief Executive Catherine Rich says the questionable tactics include suppliers being billed for in-store thefts and being forced to bid auctions for shelf space.
I call them rogues. They are store owners who behave as if this kind of culture should be seen as a badge of honour. And part of it wasn't even acceptable last century, and it's certainly not acceptable in 2020. We are going to lobby hard to get to change their practices.
Catherine Rich says the Food and Grocery Council also wants a mandatory industry code of conduct. The Prime Minister says the government won't be intervening in the Reserve Bank's approach to stimulating the economy, as the two should stay at arm's length. The National Party and former Labour Finance Minister Michael Cullen are warning the central bank's multi-billion-dollar lending program will just push house prices higher. Its Governor Adrian Orr has defended the plan, saying the bank has a clear mandate and it's not just about housing. National wants the government to rein in the bank and insist conditions be put around the new funding. Jacinda Ardern won't be heeding that call.
That seems a significant departure for a political party in New Zealand to move away from what has been long-term consensus around a separation between politicians and the Reserve Bank.
Jacinda Ardern says ministers will, however, look at options to help people access cash for a deposit through government initiatives. A Supreme Court ruling released today has paved the way for a class action against the insurer's Southern Response. A Christchurch couple, Colleen and Brendan Ross, say the government-owned insurer failed to inform them of their full entitlements when they settled the claim for their quake-damaged home. They're part of a class action potentially involving up to 3,000 other people in the same situation. The appeal court ruled all 3,000 would be part of the action unless they opt out. Southern Response appealed that to the Supreme Court, which has upheld the decision. Public health officials in Australia warn the next 2 days will be crucial in establishing whether there will be freedom of movement around the country over the Christmas holidays. The federal government is offering contact tracing and military support to South Australia as it works to contain an outbreak of coronavirus cases. The country's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Michael Kidd, says plans to have internal borders open for Christmas depends on how far the virus has spread.
I think we need to see what happens over the next 24, 48 hours. A large number of tests were carried out yesterday. I'm sure a large number of tests will be carried out today as well. We need to see the results.
Michael Kidd says most importantly they need to know if there's been community transmission. The SpaceX Dragon capsule has arrived at the International Space Station after a 27-hour journey. 4 astronauts lifted off from Florida's Kennedy Space Center yesterday afternoon. There will be a welcome ceremony for the crew as they exit their spacecraft. It's a milestone moment which NASA and SpaceX have been working on for a decade to return spaceflight capabilities to the US. The Crew 1 astronauts will spend about 6 months on board the International Space Station. Sport New Zealand has invested $7 million into targeted initiatives to support Māori in sport. The funding is from a wider $265 million sport recovery package, which recognises the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. It's the first direct funding Māori sporting organisations have ever received from Sport New Zealand. A spokesperson for the Māori Golf Association, Waihoroi Shortland, says it's a good start.
It's true, it's a beginning. Sustaining it with Māori organisations, I think there's many things that we're yet to test, or how we apply the funding to grow the sport.
Waihoroi Shortland from the Māori Golf Association. It's 4 minutes past 6. The Black Caps cricket coach Gary Stead is confident quarantined players will be capable of stepping straight out of managed isolation and performing in an international cricket match. 6 New Zealand players have trained for the first time today since returning from the Indian Premier League last week and going into quarantine in Christchurch. Stead is optimistic the 4 players in the Black Caps T20 squad to face the West Indies, who won't be released from quarantine until the eve of Game 1 next Friday, will be ready to play if needed.
We're lucky through the systems that have been put in place with the government, MIQ as well, that our players do get to train. So I guess for a couple of hours a day, getting out to still ply their trade. So when they do come out of quarantine, they can come straight into the game, hopefully, and be ready to go.
The Black Caps captain Kane Williamson and pace bowler Trent Boult won't be playing in the T20 series. The future of the former All Black and Rugby League star Sonny Bill Williams could be in television, according to a Sydney Morning Herald report. The report says the 35-year-old is in discussions with Channel 9 about becoming a league and union commentator after his $10 million contract with Canadian Rugby League club the Toronto Wolfpack ended early when the club was blocked from re-entry into the UK Super League. Meanwhile, the Wales coach Wayne Pivac has recalled former Crusaders wing Johnny McNichol to his squad for the remainder of the Autumn Nations Cup. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nikki Beattie rolls out some Hollywood big guns on the BBC Arts Hour. Tony Stamp and friends have a very Kiwi song crush. And this week's after-dinner speaker are mainly Marxist political historian Brian Roper on the T-word. How transformational is Jacinda Ardern's Labour government? Or is it just another variant of third-way social democracy? Neo-liberal, but nice. On Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Gisborne. Fine weather tonight, showers for a time tomorrow. For the remainder of the North Island, fine tonight, apart from areas of cloud. Periods of rain tomorrow. Possible thunderstorms in Taranaki, Whanganui and Manawatu, easing to isolated showers by the evening. Bulla and Westland rain. Heavy fall spreading north tonight, becoming fine tomorrow, apart from isolated showers. Fiordland showers becoming isolated tomorrow and fine spells increasing. Nelson and Marlborough cloud increasing tonight, rain at times tomorrow with possible thunderstorms and hail. Canterbury, high cloud tonight, showers developing tomorrow morning. Otago and Southland, showers developing about coastal Southland tonight, then spreading further north tomorrow but remaining mostly dry about central and North Otago. Chatham Islands, low cloud increasing this evening, rain tomorrow night. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Jacinda Ardern's considering options to help first home buyers bulk up their deposit as the government comes under pressure from all sides over skyrocketing house prices. The market continues to defy predictions of a post-COVID slump, with prices hitting new records around the country. Former Labour Finance Minister Michael Cullen has sounded the alarm over the amount of cheap money sloshing around, helping to fuel the housing boom, while Nationals calling on the government to rein in the Reserve Bank. Helping drive demand are record low interest rates, with the central bank also proposing a massive lending program, offering banks interest rates of almost zero, with the aim of stimulating the economy. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
House prices are surging around the country. The median price for a house in Auckland has now hit $1 million. Nationally, prices have increased 19.8% year on year, with the median now at $725,000. The Reserve Bank recently announced an untargeted lending scheme, which is expected to further inflame property prices. Nationals leader Judith Collins says the current market is unsustainable.
House prices are continuing
continuing to rise, way out of line with what anyone would expect, and given that this was one of the big issues that the government took into the 2017 election and has failed miserably, I think we do need to address the cost of money.
She says the government should make sure lending is targeted at the more productive parts of the economy.
We have now seeing massive amounts of extra borrowing going into housing and a lot less borrowing going into business.
Nationals calling on the government to send a letter to the bank's governor, Adrian Orr, insisting conditions be put around the new funding. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern won't be heeding that call.
That seems a significant departure for a political party in New Zealand to move away from what has been long-term consensus around the separation between politicians and the Reserve Bank.
Michael Cullen, a former Labour Finance Minister, says putting more cheap money into the economy is bound to push up house prices if there's no corresponding increase in supply. The Reserve Bank used to focus solely on inflation, but he says its actions now have much broader economic consequences.
What it's doing are things which are going to have negative impacts almost certainly on some of our crucial problems, like house price increases, and like the fact that doing this also is widening wealth differentials within society, when obviously at least the current government would prefer to see the opposite happening to that.
There won't be any action on the demand side from the government, with Ms Ardern maintaining the stance of no capital gains tax under her leadership.
Everyone knows that for a number of elections, Labor did campaign on a capital gains tax. That was something that we weren't able to win over New Zealanders with those campaigns, and we've accepted that.
Judith Collins doesn't believe a capital gains tax is the answer.
Certainly hasn't been the answer in other countries. Just have a look across the ditch in Australia. It certainly hasn't quelled it.
Ms Ardern says ministers will, however, look at options to help people access cash for a deposit through government initiatives.
There are those in Auckland who say that actually the rent that they're paying would mean that it was possible for them to be in home ownership, but that deposit is a hurdle, which is why we are continuing to look at products that may assist with that.
The Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr has said the bank has a very clear mandate to keep inflation within the set target band and to contribute to maximum sustainable employment. He says there are still massive economic challenges ahead and housing's not the only story. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The fate of a controversial National Erebus Memorial in Auckland is hanging in the balance tonight. The Waitemata Local Board is deciding whether to give landowner consent for the memorial planned for Dovemeyer Robinson Park in Parnell. It will recognise the country's worst peacetime disaster in 1979, when Air New Zealand Flight 901 crashed into Mount Erebus in Antarctica, killing all 257 people on board. The project has faced long-standing and vocal opposition from residents who live near the park. Many say the park is too small and the proposed memorial too big. Joe Malcolm, whose family have lived in Parnell for many years, says it's about protecting the land.
Those of us who oppose this are not NIMBYs. We are not a small handful of locals. We come from across this beautiful city. We are diverse politically and socially. We are not awful, unkind, uncaring people, and we are not averse to change. We are progressive and determined to protect this land for the future.
That's Joe Malcolm submitting to the Waitemata Local Board a short time ago. Well, the meeting is still going on. Our reporter Jean Bell is there and joins me now. Kia ora, Jean. Can you just fill us in on the background? I mean, how did it get to this point?
Kia ora, Lisa. Sure thing. So in late 2018, the Dovemeyer Robinson Park in Parnell was picked by the Ministry of Culture and Heritage as the site for the memorial. Now, the project has already got council resource consent, and Heritage New Zealand have also signed off on the plans. And along with that, local hapu Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei have also given their blessing. However, the plans have hit rocky water when a group of local residents have started a protest group against the memorial being located in the park. Now, they have concerns around the loss of green space in the park, and they're also concerned that the memorial will change the mood of the park to something a little bit more sombre. So that's where we're at today.
In terms of the submissions, what have we heard from both sides?
Well, it's been pretty lively in there today. There's been heckling and loud scoffing, some yelling. Some people have been told to sit down and be quiet. And this really reflects the heavy emotion in the room today. You know, this decision for the Waitemata local board is going to be an agonising one. On one side, you have the Erebus families who just want a memorial to honour their loved ones who died in the tragedy. And after an incredibly traumatic and painful event that has had a long-lasting impact, they have waited decades for this memorial. But on the other side, you have residents who love and cherish their local park, where they spend a lot of their, downtime in, and they don't want the mood of that park changed.
So, Jean, this is, it's a bit of a marathon meeting, isn't it?
It sure is. We've been in here since 1 p.m. today, and it looks like things will be wrapping up shortly, but you never know, really.
And when do we expect a decision? Do they announce it now, or do people have to wait?
We're expecting an announcement any time. At the moment, councillors are kind of giving their closing statements, and a vote will be held shortly.
Thanks, Jean. That is Jean Bell, who's down at that meeting with the Waitemata local board, who's hearing submissions on what has turned out to be a rather controversial proposal for an Erebus memorial in Parnell. Māori sporting organisations have today received their first ever splash of cash from Sport New Zealand after years of calling for some support. But the $7 million investment is being described by some as a drop in the bucket. Te Aniwa Hurihanganui reports.
An investment by Sport New Zealand has been a long time coming for New Zealand Māori Golf Association patron Waihoroi Shortland.
There isn't a bigger golf tournament in the country than a Māori golf tournament. People are amazed at how we can run a tournament on the kinds of funding that we create ourselves.
It's the first time in history Māori sporting organisations will receive direct funding. The money will come out of a wider $265 million sport recovery package, which recognises the impact COVID-19 has had on the sector and be spent over 4 years. Mr Shortland says there's no denying it's a drop in the bucket, but it's a start.
You stretch $7 million over 4 years. It's always questionable what you can do. It's true. It's a beginning. Sustaining it with Māori organisations, I think there's many things that we're yet to test, or how we apply the funding to grow the sport.
Sport New Zealand Chief Executive Peter Miskimen says the organisation has previously funded national sporting organisations with the belief that Māori organisations would benefit from that. He says it now recognises that hasn't worked.
What we understand now and recognise that they have a really valuable, culturally distinctive pathway opportunity for us. So this was an opportunity, as COVID is, for many things to reset, rethink, and we've done that piece of work now, and we're really pleased to be able to support them.
He acknowledges it's been tough for Māori organisations who have waited years for more support.
I'm sure they have been frustrated by that. A lot of them have been trying to do what they need to do on their own. We acknowledge that today, recognising the value that they represent to us. Māori represent an enormous amount of our elite athletes as well, and it's a pathway that we're really keen to explore, that culturally distinctive pathway.
The money will also help fund a new interactive app called Marae Fit, which will let whānau know about sporting events at marae in their area. The app is still being developed and will launch next year. Sport New Zealand's Māori advisor, Moana Lee Reihania, says it's a step in the right direction.
A significant moment has happened, and it is a start, it's not the end, it's the partnership and the going forward and the relationships that we are excited about.
Final decisions about which Māori organisations will receive funding and how much is yet to be confirmed. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, Hurihanganui, aho.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's return to our earlier story. This is about the government launching a market study into supermarkets to see if we're being ripped off at the checkout. It's going to go for a year. A lot of you have got thoughts on this. This person says, as a supplier, foodstuffs charged me 2.5% of my bill to pay me. They say they're doing this as they're guaranteeing that I am paid by individual stores. Funnily, stores will not allow me to bill them individually. Another 2.5% that has to be charged to consumers. I'm really struggling to get my head around that. So they take 2.5% off the bill because they're paying you? How does that work? Another listener says, I worked in a supermarket a few years back. The markup on fresh veggies and meat was up to 60%. And Kevin from Napier's got in touch. Good to hear from you, Kevin. Kevin says, great that this government wants to start yet another inquiry re supermarkets. No doubt, just like the fuel one, that nothing as of yet has or will eventuate. If this government was serious about affordability of food and people's welfare, they would scrap all GST on fresh food, vegetables and certain staple foods and sanitary items. It's not too hard to do so, says Kevin. If Australia, the UK and the US can manage a system of not taxing food, how come it's so difficult for us? I acknowledge that national increased GST to 15%. Food, however, should be off the GST agenda, but no government has had the intestinal fortitude to remove it. Thanks for your thoughts. A coronavirus vaccine can't come soon enough for the US, where the country is in crisis mode. Cases have passed more than 11 million, and there have been more than 100,000 daily new cases for 13 days straight. States are imposing new restrictions to curb the dire situation ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday next week, when Americans typically gather with friends and family to celebrate. The BBC's Nada Tawfiq reports.
She has completed remdesivir. The United States may be entering the most dangerous period in the coronavirus crisis, and this time it's affecting the entire country. In North Dakota, hospitals are so overwhelmed that COVID-positive, asymptomatic medical workers can continue to treat patients. It's a drastic change of fortunes for a state that was among the few to avoid a lockdown in the spring. Now it's in emergency mode, breaking record after grim record of hospitalizations and deaths.
Our situation has changed, and we must change with it.
In response, the Republican governor, Doug Burgum, issued a mask mandate after resisting one for months and imposed other restrictions on large gatherings. But the move remains contentious. Health officials are concerned that fatigue with the pandemic is hitting at the worst time as the cold weather and holiday season approaches.
We've got to change those assumptions.
Dr. Anthony Fauci has been back on TV, warning that another 200,000 people could die over the next few months if public health measures aren't followed until a vaccine is widely available, and that a smooth presidential transition is essential.
The virus is not going to stop and call a timeout while things change. The virus is just going to keep going. We want a smooth process for that. And the way you do that is by essentially having the two groups speak to each other and exchange information.
Yet the president's refusal to formally begin the transition process has left President-elect Joe Biden's team at a disadvantage and unable to talk to current officials such as Dr. Fauci.
Thank you very much. We're going into a very dark winter. Things are going to get much tougher before they get easier. And that requires sparing no effort to fight COVID so that we can open our businesses safely, resume our lives, and put this pandemic behind us.
Joe Biden's leadership will be tested not just by his plan to stop the rampant spread of the virus, but his ability to counter the messaging coming out of the Trump camp. Dr. Scott Atlas, one of the president's COVID advisors, encouraged people on Twitter to rise up against new restrictions in Michigan. The governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who has become a frequent target of the president and his supporters, was shocked by his statement.
It actually took my breath away, to tell you the truth. We are in the midst of the worst weeks of this pandemic.
Hope is dimming that the current occupant of the White House will prioritize the threat of COVID. Come January, it's anyone's guess what kind of situation Joe Biden and the country will find itself in.
The BBC's Nada Tawfiq there. The long, inevitable Black Caps debut of Devon Conway is finally on the cards. Having become eligible for New Zealand selection in August, the South African batsman has been named in the Black Caps T20 squad for 3 upcoming matches against the West Indies. As Clay Wilson reports, the news is no surprise to anyone who has watched Conway dominate domestic cricket for Wellington over the past 2 seasons.
South African players like Grant Elliott and Neil Wagner have certainly made their contribution to Black Caps' success in recent years. Devon Conway hopes to do the same. The 29-year-old is delighted he and partner Kim's decision to move halfway across the world 3 years ago will now allow him to realise his international cricket dream.
It was an early start this morning. I think the phone was going off at like 5 a.m. and sort of woke me up a little bit, but it was good just to have the support from my family and friends. I'm glad that they still watching closely and supporting from a distance, and it's good to have their backing and support. It means the world to me.
Conway's selection is no shock. New Zealand Domestic Player of the Year the past 2 seasons, top scorer in all 3 formats last season, the runs and accolades have been flowing. Many will see him as an obvious choice, but Conway has steered clear of that line of thinking.
You never take selection for granted. I feel, you just always want to make sure that you give yourself the best chance of getting selected, and if you're putting the results on the board and things might go your way, things might not, so you ride the wave for as long as possible, and luckily the T20 call-up has come my way, and I'm really grateful for that.
The call-up, though, doesn't include being part of the Test squad to face the West Indies. Conway is fresh off hitting 157 for Wellington against Auckland yesterday, while last season he made a mammoth 327 not out against Canterbury on his way to a red ball average of almost 90. Black Caps coach Gary Stead says it was a tough call, but they opted to go with the incumbent backup batsman for the Test squad.
Probably in that position with Will Young, but in the end, Will Young's done nothing wrong for us either and hasn't played a Test match, so it's really in similar type situations in a way.
Kyle Jamieson is also set to make his T20 debut against the West Indies. The Auckland fast bowler was bowling to Conway as he racked up yet another century yesterday and says his record couldn't be ignored.
His numbers are so compelling that he's earned his spot. Certainly he's been one of the toughest guys to bowl to around the circuit, and we found that out the last couple of days, which has been fun. So he's certainly earned his spot.
All that remains now is for Conway to transfer his immense domestic success to the international level. But the laid-back left-hander says he won't be overthinking it.
It's just another game of cricket. You just got to adjust to whatever's put in front of you and sort of bat accordingly. I think it's just about sort of absorbing that pressure and enjoying the moment whilst I'm out there.
The first of 3 T20s against the West Indies is next Friday in Auckland, with Tim Southee stepping in as skipper as Kane Williamson and Trent Boult are rested to prepare for the 2 tests. Williamson, Boult and the other Black Caps who played in the Indian Premier League had their first training today since returning and are scheduled to leave managed isolation in Christchurch on the eve of the first T20. Moti hotaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Fears in India that people would ignore coronavirus restrictions to celebrate Diwali have been realised. Delhi has recorded its worst air pollution level in 4 years after thousands of residents defied a citywide ban on fireworks to celebrate the Hindu festival. Deutsche Welle's Wade Adams has this report.
Diwali celebrations in Delhi. Firecrackers traditionally mark the start of the Hindu New Year, but this time the fun was also an act of defiance. Fears over soaring air pollution prompted a citywide ban on fireworks. But across Delhi, revellers refused to let authorities spoil the party. But a day after Diwali came the hangover. The Festival of Lights left a thick blanket of smog hanging over northern India. Residents of the bustling capital are used to severe air pollution, but the weekend's firework frenzy has only added to the crisis. The pollution was already there, but the firecrackers have made it worse. Now we're having difficulty breathing, and the children are coughing.
Frankly, it kind of creates irritation into eyes, and sometimes it is very difficult to breathe.
I don't smoke, but it feels like I'm smoking 100 cigarettes every day. Scientists say every lungful of the toxic air can cause long-term damage to people's health. The smog contains dangerous fine particles known to increase mortality rates. The World Health Organization has put safe levels at just 25 micrograms per cubic metre. After Diwali, Delhi was at times recording well over 900, more than 36 times the WHO limit. For some, a health hazard that should have been avoided.
मैं मानता हूं कि पराली जलाने की वजह से pollution बढ़ रहा है.
I know stubble burning is causing pollution, but we need to be more aware of the problem and do more from our end. People and children setting off firecrackers is harmful to us.
ये हमारे लिए बहुत बड़ा हानिकारक है.
Delhi's ban on fireworks is in place until the end of November. But as Saturday night's Diwali celebration showed, without public support, it's a ban that's difficult to enforce.
And that's Deutsche Welle's Wade Adams there. Just some breaking news before we head off. A national Erebus memorial proposed for in Auckland Park has been given the green light. Waitemata local board members have voted 4 in favour, 3 against for the controversial memorial proposed for Dovemeyer Robinson Park. So just to repeat that, the Erebus memorial will go ahead in Dovemeyer Robinson Park. And in other news, the police have made an arrest following an incident this morning. Northland police have arrested a man in relation to an incident in Whangarei where a man allegedly fired shots at police after he failed to stop. This evening, police located a 24-year-old man at a Whangarei address. He's been taken into custody. He is due to appear in the district court tomorrow in Whangarei and will face a number of charges, including firearms offences in relation to the incident. And also, just before we head off, so many of you got in touch about the freighting issues. This one in from a listener who says, I import and distribute hair products from Europe. Containers arrive monthly, but the one due to land in October won't be here until Christmas. These sea freight delays are costing us tens of thousands of dollars as we have to air freight dangerous goods across the globe to ensure our clients get their products at this critical time. Yeah, we can't have any bad hair on Christmas Day, can we? Don't forget, you can catch up on all our stories online. We'll be back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Grocery suppliers are welcoming an inquiry into supermarket pricing, saying the supermarkets have too much power. But a retail group says the government should take GST off fruit and vegetables if it wants lower prices. Ports of Auckland say staff shortages and automation problems have caused the massive backlog on the docks, and it doesn't know if it can sort through it all before Christmas. A Supreme Court ruling today paves the way for a class action against the insurer Southern Response by 3,000 people. And the Waitemata local board has voted in favour of a national Erebus memorial being built in Dovemeyer Robinson Park in Parnell. Our next news and weather is at 7. Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
President-elect Biden has said that he's not being given access to essential national security briefings. The Trump administration is refusing that access.
Lately with me, Susanna Leatawa, is your late-night eye on the latest headlines and the people who are making them.
It's one thing to require mask use in a range of settings, but we do have to think about things like access, quality and sustainability.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Susanna Leatawa, in for Karen Hay at 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Susanna. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My guest tonight is Brian Roper, a mainly Marxist political historian. He'll be talking about the current Labour-led government in this country, which says it wants to be transformational. What do they mean by that? Transformational? Like Tony Blair transformational? Brian will talk to me after the news at 7. I'd be interested in your thoughts on what you think would be transformational, the sort of transformational government policies you'd like to see in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Text me on 2101 or email nights@rnz.co.nz. Later in this hour, a little interview that's been doing very well on the website. John Reynolds, a neuroscientist from Otago University, talking about ageing and motivation and maintaining your motivation as you get older. That was with Jim Mora on Sunday. But